Commander Zethkar had witnessed the fall of 17 star systems. He had seen the Void Hunters tear through battle fleets like paper, watched as entire civilizations were consumed in darkness. For 3,000 cycles, the galaxy had trembled before this ancient evil that devoured worlds and left only emptiness behind. But on this day, as he stood on the observation deck of the massive Coalition command ship Eternal Vigil, watching a small blue world prepare for war, Zethkar would witness something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about warfare, courage, and the true nature of strength. The humans called their world Earth. Such a simple name for a planet that was about to change the fate of the galaxy forever. As the first human transport ships began their approach, carrying warriors who had never faced the cosmic horror now descending upon them, Zethkar noticed something strange in their communications. Where other species broadcast prayers to their gods or final messages to loved ones, the humans were singing. "What are they doing?" asked his aide, a nervous Quentari, whose scales had turned pale with fear. Zethkar listened to the translation. The melody was haunting, primal, and spoke of home, of sacrifice, and of a fire that burned in the human soul that no darkness could extinguish. They're not just going to war, Zethkar realized, his 3 hearts beginning to race. They're going home to it. In the distance, the Void Hunters' massive ships began to eclipse the stars, but the human vessels didn't slow down. If anything, they accelerated, and in that moment Commander Zethkar understood why the ancient texts spoke of Earthborn warriors in whispers, why even the oldest races in the galaxy had legends about the children of the third planet from Sol. The humans weren't just another species joining the fight, they were the reason the universe had hope. The first time Commander Zethkar saw a human ship, he thought it was broken. The vessel emerged from hyperspace with what appeared to be catastrophic damage. Hull plates were missing, entire sections looked like they had been welded together from scrap metal, and strange symbols were painted across its surface in what seemed like primitive markings. Compared to the sleek, energy-efficient designs of the Galactic Coalition forces, it looked like something a child might build from spare parts. "Sir," his communications officer, a young Valerian named Kess, turned from her console with confusion written across her silver features. "The human vessel is requesting permission to dock. They're asking if we have any coffee." Zethkar blinked his 3 eyes in sequence, a sign of deep confusion among his people. "Coffee? Is that some kind of military equipment?" "Unknown, sir. Our databases show it as a mild stimulant beverage from Earth." The command bridge of the Eternal Vigil fell silent. Here they were, preparing for what could be the final battle against an enemy that had consumed entire star systems, and these newcomers were asking about drinks. Grant them docking permission, Zethkar decided. Bay 7, and see if the food processors can synthesize this coffee. 3 hours later, Commander Zethkar found himself in the strangest military briefing of his long career. The human delegation consisted of 5 individuals who seemed to represent their entire military contribution to the war effort. Their leader introduced himself as General Morrison, a graying man with scars crisscrossing his face and hands that never stopped moving. "Appreciate the coffee, Commander," Morrison said, raising a steaming cup that Kess had somehow managed to produce. "Been 3 weeks since we had a decent cup. You know how it is on long deployments." Zethkar did not know how it was, but he nodded anyway. "General Morrison, I must ask about your fleet. Our sensors indicate you arrived with only 12 vessels. Surely Earth intends to send more ships to assist with the Void Hunter crisis?" Morrison exchanged glances with his companions. A woman with short-cropped red hair and lieutenant's insignia laughed, though Zethkar couldn't determine why. "Commander, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Morrison said. "We didn't come here with 12 ships. We came here with 1,200. 1,200? Zethkar felt his primary heart skip a beat. "But our scanners are probably having trouble with our stealth tech." The red-haired lieutenant interrupted. "I'm Sarah Chen, by the way. We've been running silent since we hit the edge of your system. Didn't want to spook anyone." A Carathian admiral who had been silent until now leaned forward, his tusks gleaming. "Impossible. No stealth technology can hide an entire fleet from Coalition sensors." "Want to bet on that?" Another human spoke up. This one was younger, with cybernetic implants visible along his jaw. Toggle external view, grid 77 Alpha. Kess manipulated the main display, switching to the requested coordinates. Empty space filled the screen, stars twinkling peacefully against the cosmic void. "Now scan for gravitational distortions," the cyborg human continued. The display flickered, and suddenly space was no longer empty. Ships materialized on the screen like ghosts becoming solid. Hundreds upon hundreds of them. Some were massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the Coalition fleet. Others were sleek destroyers that looked like they could outmaneuver light itself. But what struck Zethkar most was their sheer diversity. No two ships looked exactly alike, as if each had been custom-built for a specific purpose. 1,237, to be exact, Morrison said casually. Would have been more, but we left a few squadrons back home. Earth still got problems of its own to deal with. The bridge erupted in whispered conversations. The Korathian admiral's jaw hung open, displaying tusks that suddenly seemed less impressive. Cass was frantically running calculations on her console, her silver skin flushing with excitement. How? Zethkar managed to ask. Human saying, Morrison replied. Necessity is the mother of invention. We've been fighting wars for our entire recorded history, Commander. Had to get good at it, or we wouldn't have survived long enough to reach the stars. Lieutenant Chen pulled up a holographic display that showed tactical readouts. We've been monitoring the Void Hunters for the past 6 months. Interesting opponents. They use terror tactics, overwhelming force, and they feed on the life energy of entire planets. Nasty stuff. You speak of them as if they're merely another enemy, Zethkar said, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. These beings have destroyed civilizations that existed before your species learned to make fire. They consume light itself. The humans exchanged another one of those looks, and Morrison's scarred face cracked into what Zethkar was learning to recognize as a smile. Commander, with respect, you don't know much about humans, do you? Before Zethkar could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The main display shifted to show long-range sensors, and what appeared made every being on the bridge freeze in terror. The Void Hunters were coming. The enemy fleet was massive beyond comprehension. Thousands of obsidian ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect formation, like a plague of locusts descending upon a garden. At their center was something that defied description, a vessel so large that it had its own gravitational field, pulling asteroids and debris into its wake. The Devourer, whispered the Korathian admiral. They brought their flagship. Zethkar had heard stories of the Devourer. It was said to be a ship the size of a small moon, crewed by beings that had long ago abandoned any pretense of humanity or mercy. Worlds had died just from its proximity, their atmospheres stripped away by weapons that turned matter itself into energy to feed the ship's insatiable hunger. All Coalition ships prepare for emergency jump to fallback positions. Zethkar commanded, his training taking over. We cannot engage a force of this magnitude. Hold on there, Commander, Morrison said, his voice cutting through the panic. Mind if we take a look at this situation before you run away? Zethkar stared at the human general. General Morrison. That force number's in the thousands. They have weapons that can crack planets. This is not a battle any rational being would choose to fight. Morrison studied the tactical display, his scarred hands tracing the enemy formations. His companions gathered around him, pointing at different sections and speaking in rapid, technical terms that the translation software struggled to keep up with. Sarah, what do you think about a pincer movement using the asteroid field? Morrison asked. Good work, Chen replied. Martinez, can your stealth boats get close enough to tag their command vessels? The cyborg nodded. Give me 20 minutes and I can have targeting data on their entire command structure. Zethkar watched this exchange with growing horror. You cannot be seriously considering engaging this fleet. Morrison looked up from the display, and for a moment his casual demeanor vanished, replaced by something ancient and predatory that made Zethkar's secondary hearts begin racing. Commander, let me tell you something about humans. We've never been the strongest species on our planet. Hell, for most of our evolution, we were prey, but we had something that the predators didn't. What was that? Zethkar found himself asking. We never knew when to quit. The human fleet began to move, ships uncloaking throughout the system like flowers blooming in fast forward. But instead of forming defensive formations or preparing to retreat, they were advancing directly toward the Void Hunters. This is madness, the Korathian admiral muttered. Morrison overheard and grinned. Admiral, you should see what we do when we're actually trying to be crazy. On the tactical display, human ships began broadcasting on all frequencies. But instead of battle cries or final messages, they were transmitting music, songs from their homeworld, ranging from ancient war chants to complex symphonies, all blending together into something that was both beautiful and terrifying. Why are they singing? Kess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chen looked up from her tactical calculations. Because, Lieutenant, that's what humans do. We sing when we're scared, we sing when we're happy, and we sure as hell sing when we're about to show some cosmic bullies what happens when they threaten our friends. The Void Hunter fleet began to respond, their ships shifting into attack formations. Energy readings spiked as weapons systems came online, weapons that had reduced proud civilizations to cosmic dust. All Coalition vessels, Zefkar commanded, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. Maintain safe distance and prepare to record. If we survive this, the galaxy needs to know what happened here. Morrison clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that somehow managed to be both reassuring and presumptuous at the same time. Don't worry, Commander. This isn't our first dance with something that thinks it's a god. The first shots were fired by the Void Hunters, massive beams of energy that turned empty space into searing plasma. Where those beams struck human ships, Zefkar expected to see vaporization, destruction, the quick end of humanity's brief involvement in galactic affairs. Instead, he saw something impossible. The human ships absorbed the attacks. What kind of shielding is that? The Carathian admiral demanded. Martinez, the cyborg, looked up from his console with what might have been amusement. That's not shielding, Admiral. That's adaptive armor. We learned a long time ago that the best defense is one that learns from what's trying to kill it. On the display, human ships began to return fire, but their weapons were unlike anything Zefkar had ever seen. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, they launched what appeared to be small pods that attached themselves to Void Hunter vessels. Within seconds, those ships began to change, their obsidian hulls becoming mottled and weak. Nano-disassemblers, Chen explained, noting the confused stares. We take apart their ships on a molecular level and use the raw materials to build more ammunition. Waste not, want not. The battle escalated quickly. Void Hunter reinforcements poured into the system, their numbers growing from thousands to tens of thousands. The Devourer itself began to advance, its massive form blotting out stars as weapons charged that could sterilize entire worlds. And still, the humans kept singing. More human ships appeared, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. These vessels were different from the first wave, larger and more heavily armed. Some appeared to be carriers, launching swarms of smaller craft that moved with an agility that defied physics. How many ships did you bring? Zefkar asked, his voice barely controlled. Morrison checked a device on his wrist. Currently, about 15,000. But the second wave should be arriving any minute. Second wave? Before Morrison could respond, space itself seemed to tear open, not the controlled rifts of hyperspace travel, but massive wounds in reality itself. Through these gaps came vessels that made everything else in the system look like toys. One ship was so large that it had to emerge in sections, its hull extending for what appeared to be thousands of kilometers. Another seemed to be made entirely of crystalline structures that bent light around them in impossible ways. A third appeared to be a living organism, its surface pulsing with what looked like veins and organs. Meet the Heavy Brigade, Morrison said with obvious pride. These are the ships we bring when we're done being polite. The Void Hunters, for the first time in recorded history, hesitated. The Devourer, their flagship, began to turn away from the approaching human fleet. Its escorts scattered, seeking defensive positions behind asteroid fields and debris. They're retreating, Kess said in amazement. No, Morrison corrected, his expression becoming deadly serious. They're regrouping. The real fight is about to begin. As if summoned by his words, the Devourer's main weapon began to charge, a weapon that legends claimed could ignite entire star systems. Energy readings climbed beyond the scale of the Coalition's instruments, and space itself began to warp around the massive ship. All human vessels, Morrison spoke into his communicator, execute Protocol Omega. Authorization, Morrison 77 Alpha. On the display, every human ship simultaneously began to change. Hulls reconfigured, weapons emerged from hidden bays, and energy signatures spiked beyond anything Zefkar thought possible. What is Protocol Omega? He asked. Morrison's scarred face was grim as he watched his fleet transform. Commander, everything you've seen so far? That was us being careful. Protocol Omega is what happens when humans stop holding back. The largest of the human ships, the one that had emerged in sections, began to move toward the Devourer. As it approached, its purpose became clear. It wasn't a warship, it was a shipyard. A mobile construction facility that was building new vessels even as the battle raged around it. And those new ships were launching as soon as their hulls were complete, adding to the human fleet faster than the Void Hunters could destroy them. "How is this possible?" the Carathian admiral whispered. Chen answered without looking up from her tactical display. "Admiral, humans have been building things designed to kill other humans for thousands of years. When we finally had a common enemy, we got very good at it very quickly." The Devourer fired its main weapon, a beam of energy so intense that it turned everything in its path to plasma. The beam struck the advancing human shipyard dead center, and for a moment, everyone on the Coalition bridge held their breath. When the energy dissipated, the shipyard was still there, completely unharmed. "Temporal displacement shields," Martinez explained casually. "The shot hit us 3 seconds in the past. By the time the beam arrived in our present, we'd already moved." Zethkar felt something crack in his understanding of the universe. These humans weren't just another species that had learned to fight. They were something new, something that treated the fundamental laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute rules. And they were singing louder than ever. The battle that followed would be remembered across the galaxy for millennia to come. It was the day that the Void Hunters, devourers of worlds and bringers of eternal darkness, learned what it meant to face a species that had turned warfare into an art form. But for Zethkar, standing on the bridge of the eternal vigil as reality itself seemed to bend around the human fleet, one truth became crystal clear. The humans hadn't come to join the galaxy's fight against the darkness. They had come to end it. The second wave of human ships arrived like a storm breaking over a quiet sea. Commander Zethkar watched in stunned silence as vessels emerged from what appeared to be tears in space itself. These weren't the hyperspace jumps he was familiar with, the careful calculations and energy expenditures that allowed faster-than-light travel. These humans were simply stepping through reality as if it were a doorway they had opened themselves. "Commander?" Kess called from her communication station, her silver skin fluctuating between colors as her emotional state fluctuated. "I'm receiving data streams from the human fleet. Their tactical computers are sharing information faster than our systems can process." On the main display, the battle between the first wave of human ships and the Void Hunters continued to rage, but now Zethkar could see the true scope of what was happening. The humans weren't just fighting, they were learning. With every exchange of fire, every maneuver by the enemy, their tactics adapted and evolved. A Void Hunter ship would fire its disintegration beam at a human destroyer, only to watch as the destroyer's hull absorbed the energy and immediately began broadcasting the frequency to every other human vessel in the fleet. Within seconds, every human ship in the battle had developed immunity to that particular weapon. "How are they doing this?" the Carathian admiral demanded, his tusks grinding together in frustration. "No species learns that quickly." General Morrison, who had remained remarkably calm throughout the escalating chaos, finally looked up from his tactical display. "Admiral, what do you know about human children?" The question was so unexpected that it took Zethkar several moments to process it. I... Nothing. Why? "Human children are born completely helpless," Morrison explained, his scarred hands tracing formations on the holographic display, "weaker than any other species young that we've encountered. But they have one advantage. Their brains don't stop growing for the first several years of life. They're constantly adapting, learning, forming new connections." Lieutenant Chen looked up from her own console, where streams of data flowed past at incredible speeds. "We never really lose that ability, Commander. We just get better at focusing it." A new alarm sounded, different from the battle alert. This one was deeper, more ominous, and it made every non-human on the bridge instinctively step backward. "What is that?" Zethkar asked. Morrison's expression became grim. "That, Commander, is the sound of a human ship going to full battle mode." On the display, one of the massive vessels from the second wave began to transform. What Zethkar had initially thought was a single ship revealed itself to be something far more complex. Sections that had appeared to be hull plating folded away to reveal weapons bays, hangar decks, and what looked like an entire fleet of smaller vessels nested within the larger structure. "That's the UES Prometheus," Chen said with obvious pride in her voice. "She's a colony ship, troop transport, mobile base, and dreadnought all rolled into one. Oh, and she's also our communications hub for this sector." "How many people are on that ship?" Kess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About 3 million, Morrison replied casually. "Give or take a few thousand, depending on recent births." The number hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The largest coalition vessels carried crews of perhaps 10,000 at most. The idea of a single ship housing 3 million beings was beyond his comprehension. 3 million, the Carathian admiral repeated. That's larger than most planetary populations. Earth has about 12 billion people. Martinez, the cyborg, spoke up from where he was interfacing directly with the ship's computer systems. We learned a long time ago to think big. The Prometheus began launching fighters, but these weren't the small 1- or 2-person craft that most civilizations used. Each fighter was the size of a coalition corvette, and they emerged from the massive ship's bays in formations of hundreds. And they were all piloted. Wait, Zethkar said, studying the energy signatures. Those fighters have life signs. You're sending living beings into direct combat against the Void Hunters? Morrison nodded. Every fighter pilot volunteered, Commander. In fact, we had to turn away volunteers. More people wanted to fly against these things than we had ships for. But why? Zethkar couldn't comprehend it. Automated systems would be safer, more efficient. Because, Chen said, her red hair catching the light from the tactical displays, humans don't leave the fighting to machines when it matters. We show up ourselves. The battle around the Devourer was intensifying. The massive Void Hunter flagship had begun deploying its own secondary vessels, ships that were themselves larger than anything in the Coalition fleet. But for every Void Hunter vessel that appeared, 3 human ships were already in position to meet it. How did they predict their formations? Zethkar asked. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years, Morrison explained. After a while, you learn to read patterns. The Void Hunters are good, but they're not human. A new signal appeared on the long-range sensors, and this one made every Coalition officer on the bridge freeze in terror. More Void Hunter ships were arriving, and not just a few reinforcements. It was an entire battle fleet, possibly the largest force the ancient enemy had ever assembled. Dear gods, the Korathian admiral whispered. There are hundreds of thousands of them. The arriving Void Hunter fleet was indeed massive beyond anything previously recorded. Their ships stretched across space like a living shadow, each vessel radiating the cold malevolence that had marked their species for millennia. At their center were ships that even the Devourers seemed small in comparison to. Vessels that looked less like constructs and more like pieces of the void itself given form. All Coalition ships, Zethkar commanded, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his hearts. Prepare for emergency evacuation. This system cannot be held. Hold on there, Commander, Morrison said, but his tone had changed. The casual confidence was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more focused. Mind if we try something before you give up? Before Zethkar could respond, the human fleet began to move in ways that defied tactical sense. Instead of forming defensive positions or preparing to retreat, they were spreading out, creating what appeared to be gaps in their own lines. What are they doing? Kess asked. They're creating killing fields, the Korathian admiral said with growing understanding. They want the Void Hunters to advance through those gaps. Morrison smiled, and for the first time since meeting the humans, Zethkar found that expression truly frightening. Admirals got good tactical sense, Morrison said. Chen, initiate the Dunkirk Protocol. Dunkirk Protocol activated. Chen confirmed. All civilian vessels, you are cleared for combat operations. Zethkar was about to ask what civilian vessels meant when space around the human fleet began to shimmer. Ships appeared that had been completely hidden, not by stealth technology, but by what seemed to be perfect camouflage. Cargo vessels, passenger liners, mining ships, even what appeared to be a luxury yacht designed for interstellar tourism. And every single one of them was armed. You militarized your civilian fleet? Zethkar asked in amazement. Not militarized, Chen corrected. More like revealed their true purpose. Every ship built in human space for the past 50 years has been designed with potential combat applications. The cargo haulers can deploy fighters, the passenger ships carry troops, and the mining vessels have weapons designed to crack asteroids. And the yacht? The Korathian admiral asked, pointing to the luxury vessel that was now extending weapon arrays that seemed far too large for its hull. Martinez grinned, his cybernetic implants gleaming. That's the personal ship of Samuel Chen, Sarah's grandfather. He's 93 years old, has fought in 4 different wars, and he's been waiting 60 years for a chance to test his custom particle beam array. On the communication channels, an elderly voice crackled through, speaking in what the translation software identified as an ancient Earth language called Mandarin, followed by heavily accented English. This is Admiral Chen aboard the Golden Dragon. All ships, Formation Pattern 7. Let's show these void-touched bastards how we did things in the Belt Wars. The civilian fleet moved with precision that rivaled the military vessels, taking positions throughout the human formation. What had looked like tactical gaps suddenly became crossfire zones, spaces where any advancing enemy would face fire from multiple directions. The Void Hunters took the bait. Their advance fleet, numbering in the tens of thousands, surged forward through the apparent gaps in the human lines. Their ships moved with the confidence of predators that had never known defeat, weapons charging as they closed distance for what they clearly expected to be a final, overwhelming assault. Instead, they flew into the most elaborate ambush in galactic history. The first wave of Void Hunter ships found themselves surrounded on all sides by human vessels that had appeared from nowhere. Cargo ships opened bays to reveal fighter squadrons, passenger liners deployed orbital bombardment platforms, and mining vessels launched payloads of asteroid-cracking explosives that had been modified for anti-ship use. But it was Admiral Chen's yacht that provided the most shocking display. The Golden Dragon, a ship no larger than a Coalition scout vessel, fired a beam of energy that punched completely through 3 Void Hunter dreadnoughts, emerged from the far side of their formation, and continued on to destroy 2 more ships that had been advancing from the opposite direction. What in the name of all gods was that? The Carathian admiral demanded. Concentrated solar plasma, Martinez replied with obvious admiration. The old man figured out how to miniaturize a stellar core and mount it on his personal ship. He's been working on that project for 30 years. The Void Hunter advance stalled, their ships caught in crossfire from directions they hadn't known existed. But rather than retreat, they did what they had always done when faced with resistance. They called for more ships. The main Void Hunter fleet began to advance, and this time there was no ambiguity about their intentions. The Devourer itself moved forward, accompanied by ships that dwarfed even the massive human colony vessels. Energy readings climbed to levels that made the Coalition's instruments begin to shut down to prevent overload. "Now we'll see what humans are really made of," Morrison said quietly. The human response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships that had been hiding throughout the system revealed themselves, emerging from behind planets, asteroids, and even the system's star itself. The human fleet didn't just double or triple in size. It increased by an order of magnitude. "How many ships do you people have?" Zefkar asked, his voice barely controlled. "In this system, about 500,000, Morrison replied. "But we're not done yet. Martinez, initiate Protocol Genesis." The cyborg's hands moved over his interface with mechanical precision. Genesis Protocol authorized. All factory ships begin production runs. Priority: Anti-Void Hunter configurations. Throughout the human fleet, vessels that Zefkar had assumed were support ships began to change. What he now realized were mobile manufacturing platforms started producing new ships at a rate that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Raw materials were converted to finished vessels in minutes, not the months or years that shipbuilding typically required. "How?" was all Zefkar could manage to say. "Replication technology," Chen explained, monitoring the production streams. "We learned to break down matter at the quantum level and rebuild it into whatever we need. As long as we have raw materials and energy, we can make more ships." "And do you have enough raw materials?" Morrison gestured toward the system's asteroid belt, where human mining vessels were working with incredible efficiency. "Commander, this system has enough raw materials to build a fleet larger than every other species in the galaxy combined. We just needed time to process it." The Void Hunters, for the first time in their recorded history, found themselves outnumbered. The Devourer's main weapon charged again, but this time, instead of targeting a single ship, it was preparing to fire at the system's star. If they could destabilize the stellar core, they could destroy everything in the system, human and Coalition alike. "They're targeting the star," Kess reported, her voice shaking with fear. "If that beam hits the stellar core, the entire system dies," Zefkar finished. "General Morrison, you need to retreat. If they destabilize our star, nothing will survive." Morrison looked at the tactical display, where the Devourer's weapon was reaching critical charge levels. Then he looked at his companions, and something passed between them that needed no translation. "Sarah, remember when we talked about what we'd do if someone tried to blow up a star?" Chen's face broke into a grin that was equal parts excitement and madness. "I remember you said it would be impossible to stop. I also remember you saying you'd found a way to make impossible things happen." Chen turned to her console and began entering commands that scrolled past faster than Zefkar could read. "All ships, this is Lieutenant Chen, with a priority override from Earth Command. Execute Project Daybreak. Repeat, execute Project Daybreak." Throughout the human fleet, ships began to move toward the system's star. Not to defend it, but to surround it. "What are you doing?" the Carathian admiral demanded. "Something that's either going to save the system or destroy it faster than the Void Hunters could." Morrison replied. But that's the thing about humans, Admiral. When someone threatens our home, we don't calculate odds. We just make sure that if we go down, we take them with us. The human ships formed a sphere around the star, their hulls beginning to glow with energy discharges. Whatever they were planning, it was drawing power directly from the stellar core itself. The Devourer fired. A beam of energy powerful enough to crack planets lanced across space toward the star. But instead of hitting the stellar surface, it struck the shell of human ships that surrounded it. And those ships absorbed every joule of energy. Stellar collection array, Martinez explained to the stunned coalition officers. We turn the entire star into a weapon. The human ships began to glow brighter, and energy readings climbed to levels that Zethkar's instruments couldn't measure. Then, as one, they turned toward the Void Hunter fleet. All Void Hunter vessels, Morrison said into the communications array, his voice carrying to every ship in the system. This is General Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. You have threatened our allies and attempted to destroy an inhabited system. Surrender now or learn why humanity has never lost a war when our homeworld was threatened. The response from the Void Hunters was a coordinated attack by their entire fleet, hundreds of thousands of ships firing simultaneously at the human positions. The human response was simple, elegant, and absolutely terrifying. Every ship in their fleet, from the massive dreadnoughts to Admiral Chen's yacht, fired at the same moment. But they weren't firing weapons. They were firing concentrated stellar energy, the raw power of a star given direction and purpose. The beam that emerged from the human fleet was visible across half the galaxy. It struck the Void Hunter formation and simply erased everything it touched, converting matter back to its component atoms in a display of power that made the Devourer's weapon look like a child's toy. When the energy faded, there was nothing left of the Void Hunter fleet except empty space and the fading echoes of radiation. Nothing, that is, except the Devourer itself, which had somehow survived the blast. Impossible, Zethkar whispered. Nothing could have survived that. The massive Void Hunter flagship hung in space like a wounded predator, its hull cracked and bleeding energy but still functional. And it was turning toward the Earth's coordinates. It's going to run, Chen realized. It's going to try to reach Earth. Morrison's expression became something that Zethkar would remember for the rest of his life. It was the look of a predator that had just realized its prey was trying to escape. No, Morrison said quietly. It's not. He turned to Martinez. Signal Earth Command. Tell them we need the Omega fleet. Sir, the Omega fleet is still experimental. We don't know if the drives are stable. Martinez, Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. They just tried to run toward our home. Stability is no longer a concern. The cyborg hesitated for only a moment before sending the signal. Seconds later, space itself seemed to crack open as ships emerged that made everything else in the system look primitive by comparison. The Omega fleet consisted of only 5 ships, but each one was the size of a small moon. They moved without any visible means of propulsion, their hulls seeming to bend light and space around them. What are those? Zethkar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Those, Morrison said, watching the massive ships move toward the fleeing Devourer, are what happens when humans stop pretending that physics has rules we need to follow. The lead ship of the Omega fleet reached the Devourer in seconds, despite the fact that it should have taken minutes to cross that distance. When it fired, the weapon it used didn't travel through space. It simply made the Devourer cease to exist. One moment the massive Void Hunter flagship was there, limping toward the edge of the system. The next moment there was nothing but empty space, as if it had never existed at all. Ontological weapon, Chen explained to the stunned coalition officers. It doesn't destroy the target, it removes it from reality itself. In the silence that followed, as the human fleet began to stand down from battle stations, Zethkar found himself looking at these strange beings with something approaching awe. General Morrison, he said finally, what exactly are you? Morrison thought about the question for a long moment before answering. Commander, we're what happens when a species spends its entire evolutionary history fighting for survival, and then someone gives us the stars to defend. He looked out at the human fleet, where millions of beings were already beginning the process of rebuilding what had been damaged and preparing for whatever came next. We're humans, and we don't lose. 3 days after the destruction of the Void Hunter fleet, Commander Zethkar was beginning to understand that his initial assessment of humanity had been catastrophically inadequate. The human fleet hadn't simply defeated an enemy and departed, as any rational military force would have done. Instead, they had settled into the system as if they owned it, which, given their overwhelming firepower, they essentially did. But rather than behaving like conquerors, they were acting like neighbors. Commander, Kess reported from her communication station, her silver skin fluctuating between confusion and amazement. The humans are requesting permission to establish a temporary medical station on asteroid XKI 7739. They want to treat Coalition wounded. Zethkar looked at the tactical display, where human ships were indeed moving toward one of the system's larger asteroids. Construction vessels were already beginning to hollow out the interior, working with an efficiency that suggested they had done this many times before.
They have wounded of their own to tend to, he said.
Why are they concerned with ours? General Morrison, who had taken up what appeared to be permanent residence on the Eternal Vigil's bridge, looked up from a cup of coffee that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Because that's what decent people do, Commander. You help when you can. The simplicity of the statement was somehow more unsettling than any display of advanced technology. In galactic politics, aid always came with strings attached, obligations incurred, debts that would eventually need to be repaid. But the humans seemed to genuinely expect nothing in return. General, the Carathian admiral said from his position at the tactical display, your medical technology, how advanced is it compared to Coalition standards? Lieutenant Chen answered without looking up from her console, where she was monitoring the construction of the medical facility. We stopped people from dying of old age about 40 years ago, if that gives you a sense of scale. The bridge fell silent. Death from aging was considered a fundamental law of biology by every known species. The idea that it could simply be stopped was beyond comprehension. You've conquered death? Zethkar asked. Not conquered, Morrison corrected. More like negotiated a better deal. Humans can still die, Commander. We just get to choose when. Before Zethkar could process that information fully, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Not battle alarms this time, but the deep resonant tones that indicated incoming hyperspace signatures. Long-range sensors detect multiple Coalition fleets approaching, Kess reported. Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Zethkar felt his heart sink. The Coalition High Command had undoubtedly received reports of the battle, and they would be arriving with questions, demands, and possibly orders that could complicate the delicate situation with humanity. How many ships, he asked. Current count shows approximately 8,000 vessels from 14 different species. Kess replied, her voice growing steadily more concerned as the numbers climbed. This appears to be the largest Coalition fleet ever assembled. Morrison's expression became thoughtful. That's a lot of ships, Commander. Should we be concerned? The question was asked casually, but Zethkar caught the underlying tension in the human general's voice. Around the bridge, he noticed that the other humans had stopped their casual conversations and were suddenly paying very close attention to the sensor readings. The Coalition High Command will want answers, Zethkar explained carefully. They'll need to understand what happened here, assess the human military capability, and determine how this affects the balance of power in the galaxy. And if they determine that humans are a threat? Chen asked, her hand moving unconsciously toward her sidearm. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Zethkar realized that he was standing at a crossroads that could determine the fate of two civilizations. On one side was the Coalition, the political and military alliance that had maintained peace in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. On the other side was humanity, a species that had just demonstrated the ability to casually erase entire fleets from existence. General Morrison, he said carefully, the Coalition operates on the principle of collective security. No single species should possess the ability to threaten all others. Morrison nodded slowly. And you think humanity represents such a threat? I think, Zethkar said, choosing his words with extreme care, that humanity represents something new, something that the Coalition's political structures weren't designed to accommodate. Before Morrison could respond, Martinez looked up from his console with an expression of concern. General, I'm detecting stealth signatures throughout the system. Someone's been watching us. The tactical display shifted to show ghost images scattered throughout local space. Ships that had been hidden, observing the battle and its aftermath without revealing themselves. How many? Morrison asked. Hard to say. The stealth technology is sophisticated, but different from ours. I'd estimate maybe 50 vessels. Chen frowned at her own console. That's not Coalition tech. The energy signatures don't match any known species in our databases. A new alarm sounded, different from the others. This one was sharp, urgent, and it made every human on the bridge suddenly tense. What is that signal? Zethkar asked. Morrison's expression had gone from casual to deadly serious in an instant. That's a Void Hunter proximity alert. There are more of them in the system. Before anyone could respond, space began to shimmer near the asteroid belt. Ships appeared that were definitely Void Hunter in origin, but different from the fleet they had just destroyed. These vessels were smaller, more streamlined, and their hulls pulsed with an organic rhythm that was deeply disturbing to observe. "Those aren't regular Void Hunters," Martinez said, his cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's sensors. "The biosignatures are different, more complex." Morrison turned to Zethkar with an expression that was both apologetic and determined. "Commander, I need to ask you to move your ship to a safe distance. What's about to happen? Well, let's just say that these particular Void Hunters require special attention." "What do you mean, special attention?" the Carathian admiral demanded. Chen answered while her hands moved over her tactical controls. "These are Void Hunter scouts, Admiral. They're not just ships. They're living beings bred specifically for intelligence gathering and infiltration, and they've been here long enough to learn everything about how we fight." The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. If these creatures had observed the entire battle, had seen every human weapon and tactic, then they could report back to whatever remained of the Void Hunter civilization. Humanity's advantages would be neutralized. "How long have they been here?" he asked. "Based on the decay patterns in their stealth fields," Martinez replied. "At least 3 days, maybe longer." Morrison activated his communicator. "All human vessels. This is General Morrison. We have adaptive scouts in the system. Implement Protocol Hydra immediately." Throughout the human fleet, ships began to change in ways that were even more dramatic than what Zethkar had seen during the battle. Hulls reconfigured, weapons emerged from hidden compartments, and energy signatures shifted to completely different spectrums. "What is Protocol Hydra?" Zethkar asked. "It's what we do when the enemy has learned how to fight us," Morrison replied grimly. "We become something they've never seen before. The human ships that emerged from the transformation were unlike anything that had participated in the previous battle. Where before they had been powerful but recognizably technological, now they looked almost organic themselves, their hulls flowing and shifting like living tissue." "Biomechanical integration," Chen explained, noting the confused stares from the Coalition officers. "We learned a long time ago that sometimes the best way to fight monsters is to become better monsters." The Void Hunter scouts began to move, their formations indicating that they were preparing to flee the system with the intelligence they had gathered. But as they accelerated toward hyperspace jump points, they found their path blocked. Human ships had somehow anticipated their movements and were already in position at every possible escape route. But these weren't the same ships that had been there moments before. These were vessels that seemed to predict the scouts' movements before they made them. "How are they doing that?" Kess asked in amazement. Martinez smiled, his cybernetic implants gleaming. "Quantum entanglement network. Every human ship is connected to every other human ship at the subatomic level. When one ship's crew thinks about a tactical decision, every other crew knows about it instantly." "You've created a hive mind?" the Carathian admiral asked in horror. "Not a hive mind," Morrison corrected. "A collective consciousness. Each human maintains their individuality, but we can share thoughts and experiences when necessary. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it." The Void Hunter scouts found themselves trapped in a sphere of human ships that moved with perfect coordination. Every time they tried to break through the containment, the human vessels were already moving to intercept them. But rather than simply destroying the scouts, the human fleet was herding them toward a specific location in the system. "Why aren't they firing?" Zethkar asked. "Because," Morrison said, "we need to know what they learned, and more importantly, where they were planning to take that information." Near the edge of the system, space began to twist and fold in ways that hurt to look at. A massive structure was forming, built from energy and exotic matter that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "What is that?" Zethkar whispered. "Interrogation facility," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "We're going to extract every piece of information from their minds, trace their communication networks, and find out exactly how many more Void Hunter colonies exist in the galaxy." "You can extract information from their minds?" "We can extract information from anything that thinks, Commander. Consciousness leaves traces, and humans got very good at reading those traces." The Void Hunter scouts were driven into the dimensional structure, which closed around them like a fist. Beam. Beam. What happened next was impossible for the Coalition sensors to detect, but the results were immediate. Throughout the human fleet, Displays began showing star charts that extended far beyond any known galactic boundaries. Thousands of systems were highlighted, each one marked with symbols that indicated Void Hunter presence. Dear gods, the Carathian admiral breathed. There are so many of them. Morrison studied the data with an expression that was both grim and determined. Chen, transmit this data to Earth Command. Priority Alpha classification. Sir, the Coalition fleet will be here in 4 hours. If they see this intelligence, then they'll understand why we can't let any Void Hunters escape to warn the others. Before anyone could ask what he meant, the dimensional interrogation facility collapsed in on itself, taking the captured scouts with it. There was no explosion, no debris. They simply ceased to exist. Now they can't report what they learned, Morrison explained to the stunned Coalition officers. But we know where all their friends are hiding. Zethkar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. General Morrison, you're not planning to hunt down every Void Hunter colony in the galaxy. Morrison met his gaze steadily. Commander, these creatures have been terrorizing civilizations for millennia. They've consumed entire species, destroyed worlds, and spread darkness wherever they go. Yes, we're going to hunt down every single one of them. That would require a military campaign spanning decades, possibly centuries. The logistics alone are already being handled. Chen interrupted, pointing to the tactical display where human construction ships were building what appeared to be permanent facilities throughout the system. We're not just planning a campaign, Commander. We're planning the complete eradication of the Void Hunter species. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Zethkar had witnessed the casual destruction of a massive Void Hunter fleet, had seen weapons that violated the fundamental laws of physics, and had watched humans treat the impossible as routine. But this was something different. This was genocide on a galactic scale. You can't simply decide to wipe out an entire species, the Carathian admiral protested. There are laws, treaties, protocols for dealing with hostile aliens. Morrison's expression became colder than the vacuum of space. Admiral, tell me about these laws when the Void Hunters have finished consuming your homeworld. Tell me about treaties when they're feeding on the life force of your children. But the Coalition, Morrison interrupted, has been fighting a defensive war for 3,000 years. You've been trying to contain them, negotiate with them, find some kind of peaceful coexistence. How has that worked out? Before anyone could answer, Martinez looked up from his console with alarm. General, the approaching Coalition fleet just changed course. They're not heading for our position anymore. Where are they going? Earth. The single word fell into the bridge like a bomb. Morrison's casual demeanor vanished completely, replaced by something that made Zethkar instinctively step backward. Explain. Martinez's fingers flew over his controls. Intercepted communications indicate that the Coalition High Command has classified humanity as a potential galactic threat. They're sending the fleet to Earth to negotiate. From a position of strength. Morrison was silent for a long moment, his scarred face showing no emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. They're threatening our homeworld. Chen looked up from her console, her expression matching her general's. Sir, Earth Command is requesting orders. The home fleet is ready to respond. How many ships does Earth have in its home system? Zethkar asked, dreading the answer. Morrison's smile returned, but it was nothing like his earlier casual expression. This was the smile of a predator that had just scented blood. Commander, let me ask you a question. If someone threatened your homeworld, how many ships would you want defending it? Zethkar considered the question. As many as possible? Earth currently has approximately 2 million ships in the Sol system, Morrison said quietly. That's just the ones we keep at home for defense. The ones we're really proud of. The number was so large that it took several moments for Zethkar to process it. 2 million ships, the entire Coalition fleet approaching Earth numbered 8,000. General. He said urgently, you need to stop this. If those fleets engage, it will be a massacre. Morrison nodded. Yes, it will be. The question is whether the Coalition realizes that before they do something irreversibly stupid. He activated his communicator again. All human vessels, prepare for emergency hyperspace jump to Earth. We have a diplomatic situation that requires immediate attention. Wait, Zethkar said desperately. Let me contact the Coalition fleet. Let me try to explain what they're facing. Morrison paused, his hand hovering over the jump controls. Commander, these people just threatened the homeworld of a species that casually erases Void Hunter fleets from existence. What exactly are you going to tell them that will make this better? Zethkar realized that he didn't have an answer. How could he explain that humanity wasn't just another advanced species, but something entirely new? How could he make the Coalition understand that they were about to pick a fight with beings who treated the laws of physics as guidelines and had turned their entire civilization into a weapon? I'll tell them the truth, he said finally. That humanity isn't our enemy. That they're trying to help. Morrison studied him for a moment, then nodded. You have 5 minutes, Commander. After that, we jump to Earth, and if the Coalition fleet is still there when we arrive, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone on the bridge understood the implications. As Zethkar began composing what might be the most important message in galactic history, he found himself wondering if the universe was about to witness the birth of a new age of peace, or if he was about to watch two civilizations destroy each other in the most one-sided war the galaxy had ever seen. Commander Zethkar had never realized how difficult it could be to save two civilizations with a single message. He stood before the communication console on the Eternal Vigil, trying to find words that could prevent what might become the most catastrophic military engagement in galactic history. Behind him, General Morrison waited with the patience of a predator, his hand resting casually near the controls that would launch the human fleet toward Earth in less than 3 minutes. Coalition Command, this is Commander Zethkar, aboard the command vessel Eternal Vigil. He began, his voice steadier than he felt. I am sending priority classification data regarding the human species. Do not, under any circumstances, approach their homeworld with hostile intent. That's not going to be enough, Lieutenant Chen said quietly from her position at the tactical console. The Coalition thinks they understand what they're dealing with. Zethkar looked at the data streaming across his display. Intelligence reports, tactical analyses, political assessments. All of them painted humanity as a powerful but ultimately manageable threat. None of them captured the reality of what he had witnessed. Coalition Command, the intelligence reports you have received are fundamentally inadequate, he continued. Humanity possesses military capabilities that exceed our current understanding of theoretical maximums. They have just single-handedly destroyed the largest Void Hunter fleet in recorded history using weapons that appear to violate known physics. Martinez looked up from his interface, cybernetic implants gleaming with data streams. Coalition fleet is maintaining course and speed toward Earth, General. Estimated arrival in 18 hours. Morrison's expression remained calm, but Zethkar could see the tension building in the human general's posture. Around the bridge, other human personnel were making preparations with the efficient calm of people who had done this many times before. 2 minutes, Commander, Morrison said quietly. Zethkar took a deep breath and activated the emergency priority channel, the communication frequency reserved for threats to galactic stability. This is Commander Zethkar to all Coalition forces. I am invoking Article 77 of the Galactic Accords. I have personally witnessed humanity deploy weapons capable of stellar-scale destruction. They have demonstrated the ability to manipulate time, space, and matter at the quantum level. Any hostile action against their homeworld will result in consequences that I cannot adequately describe. The response came immediately, crackling across the communication array with the authority of the Coalition High Command. Commander Zethkar, this is Admiral Corthan of the Combined Fleet. Your reports have been received and analyzed. The human threat is acknowledged but manageable. We are proceeding with diplomatic negotiations from a position of strength. Stand down and maintain your current position. Zethkar felt his heart sink. Admiral Corthan was old-school Coalition military, the kind of commander who believed that overwhelming force was the solution to all diplomatic problems. He was also one of the most decorated officers in Coalition history, having successfully negotiated from strength with dozens of hostile species, none of whom had been human. Admiral, Zethkar tried one more time. You do not understand what you are approaching. These beings have technology that makes our most advanced weapons look primitive. They have just demonstrated the ability to erase matter from existence itself. Acknowledged, Commander. All forces are prepared for advanced technological capabilities. We are not going to Earth to start a war. We are going there to ensure that no war becomes necessary. The communication ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Well, Morrison said, his voice carrying a note of regret, I tried to give them a chance. He activated his controls, and throughout the human fleet, ships began to disappear. Not hyperspace jumps, but the same dimensional folding that had allowed them to arrive instantly when needed. Where are they going? Kess asked, her silver skin fluctuating rapidly with stress. Home, Chen replied simply, to defend Earth. But the Coalition fleet hasn't arrived yet, the Korathian admiral protested. There's still time for diplomacy. Morrison looked at him with something approaching pity. Admiral, let me explain something about human psychology. When someone threatens our home, we don't wait to see if they're serious. We prepare for war and hope for the best. But surely your government will want to negotiate. Our government, Morrison said, gathering his equipment, consists of 12 billion people who just learned that an alien fleet is approaching Earth with what they consider hostile intent. Admiral, you've seen what a few hundred human ships can do when they're being polite. Do you really want to find out what 12 billion angry humans are capable of? Before anyone could respond, space around the Eternal Vigil began to shimmer. A human ship materialized alongside them, its hull bearing markings that indicated diplomatic status. Commander Zethkar, Morrison said, heading toward the airlock. You're invited to witness the negotiations, assuming you want to see how this ends. Zethkar found himself following the human general, driven by a mixture of fascination and horror. As they transferred to the human ship, he noticed that its interior was unlike anything he had expected. Instead of military efficiency, the corridors were decorated with art, plants, and what appeared to be family photographs. This is a warship? He asked. This is the UES Diplomacy, Chen replied, leading them toward the bridge. She's designed for exactly this kind of situation.
The ship's bridge was a study in contradictions.
Advanced tactical displays shared space with comfortable seating areas, and the crew included beings who were obviously non-human alongside the human personnel. General Morrison, one of the non-human crew members said, rising from a console. Zethkar recognized the species as Altairian, known throughout the galaxy for their pacifist philosophy. Earth Command has updated our mission parameters. We are authorized to use any means necessary to protect the homeworld. Morrison nodded. Understood. Take us home, Captain Singh. The journey to Earth took 3 hours, though Zethkar suspected that was because the humans were deliberately slowing down to allow the Coalition fleet to arrive first. During the trip, he found himself in conversations with crew members that challenged everything he thought he knew about military organization. So you're telling me, he said to the Altarian captain, that you joined the human military despite your species' commitment to pacifism? Captain Singh smiled, her crystalline features reflecting the bridge lighting. Commander, I joined because of our commitment to pacifism. Humans don't want to fight. They want to protect. There's a difference. But they've built the most powerful military force in galactic history. Because, Singh replied, sometimes the best way to protect peace is to be very, very good at war. When they emerged from hyperspace at Earth, Zethkar understood for the first time what it meant to see a world prepared for war. The Sol system was transformed. What had once been empty space was now filled with defensive installations that stretched from Mercury's orbit to beyond Pluto. Massive ring structures surrounded Earth itself, their surfaces bristling with weapons that made the Void Hunter Devourer's armaments look primitive. And between these fixed defenses, ships moved in formations that defied comprehension. Millions of vessels, ranging from fighters no larger than shuttles to dreadnoughts that dwarfed small moons. They moved with perfect coordination, creating patterns that were both beautiful and terrifying.
How many ships?
Zethkar asked weakly. Martinez, who had remained at his console throughout the journey, looked up with what might have been pride. Current count is 4.7 million active vessels, with approximately 2 million more in reserve. In reserve? Ships we're keeping back in case this gets serious, Morrison explained. The Coalition fleet, when it finally arrived, looked pathetically small by comparison. 8,000 ships, the largest force the Coalition had ever assembled, appeared at the edge of the system like a minor irritation that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Coalition fleet, this is Earth Defense Control, a calm voice announced across all frequencies. You are entering the Sol system without invitation. Please state your intentions. Admiral Korthvan's response was broadcast across the system. Earth Defense Control, this is the Coalition Combined Fleet under Admiral Korthvan. We are here for diplomatic negotiations regarding humanity's recent military actions and their implications for galactic stability. Acknowledged, Admiral Korthvan. Please reduce your fleet to no more than 50 vessels for diplomatic purposes. The remainder should withdraw to a safe distance. The silence that followed stretched for several minutes. Zethkar could imagine the conversation taking place aboard the Coalition command ship, the shock of being ordered to withdraw by beams they had come to intimidate. Earth Defense Control. Korthvan's voice finally returned, noticeably less confident than before. The Coalition fleet will maintain its current formation. We require these numbers for security purposes. Admiral, the Earth voice replied, still perfectly calm. We understand your concern for security, however, bringing 8,000 warships to a diplomatic meeting is considered poor etiquette in human culture. Please comply with our request. And if we refuse, then we will assume that your intentions are not diplomatic. Throughout the Sol system, the human fleet began to move, not aggressively, but with the casual precision of a force that knew exactly what it was capable of. Weapon systems that had been dormant began to power up, and energy readings climbed to levels that made the Coalition sensors begin shutting down to prevent overload. Dear gods, Zethkar whispered, watching the display. They're not just prepared for war, they've turned their entire star system into a weapon. Morrison nodded grimly. Commander, let me show you something that might help you understand human thinking. He activated a display that showed Earth itself, the blue-green world that had given birth to humanity. But superimposed over the planet's surface were energy readings that indicated massive installations hidden beneath the oceans, inside mountains, and in orbital positions that were invisible to standard sensors. Every human world is fortified like this, Morrison explained. We learnt a long time ago that the best way to keep peace is to make war too expensive for anyone to consider. On the communication channel, Admiral Korthvan's voice had lost all trace of its earlier confidence. Earth Defense Control, the Coalition fleet will comply with your request. We are reducing our diplomatic contingent to 50 vessels. Thank you, Admiral. Please proceed to coordinates 127.4 by 89.7. A reception committee will meet you there. What Zethkar saw next redefined his understanding of diplomatic protocol. The reception committee consisted of a single human ship, no larger than a Coalition cruiser. It approached the 50 remaining Coalition vessels with what appeared to be casual disregard for the fact that it was outnumbered 50-1. That's remarkably brave, the Korathian admiral observed. Chen laughed, though not unkindly. Admiral, that ship is armed with weapons that could destroy this entire system. The pilot is probably more concerned about remembering to offer everyone coffee. The diplomatic reception took place aboard a space station that materialized near Earth's moon, apparently constructed specifically for the occasion. As Zethkar and his companions were transported to the station, he found himself wondering if anything about humanity could still surprise him. The answer, he discovered, was yes. The diplomatic conference room was appointed like something from a luxury resort rather than a military facility. Comfortable seating was arranged around a holographic display that showed real-time views of gardens, oceans, and cities from Earth's surface. The walls were covered with art representing thousands of different cultures, many of which Zethkar didn't recognize. And serving refreshments to the Coalition delegation were beings from dozens of different species, all wearing what appeared to be human military uniforms. Commander, one of them said, approaching Zethkar with a tray of beverages. I'm Lieutenant Kesvara of the Earth Defense Force. Would you care for something to drink? Zethkar stared at the being, recognizing the species as Veltar, a civilization that the Coalition had lost contact with over 200 years ago. How was all he could manage to ask. Lieutenant Kesvara smiled with genuine warmth. The humans found our colony ships, Commander. They were drifting in dead space after our homeworld was consumed by the Void Hunters. They took us in, gave us new homes, and when we asked how we could repay them, they said we could help them protect other species from suffering the same fate. Admiral Korthvan, who had been listening to this exchange, looked around the room with growing unease. How many species have you rescued? The answer came from an unexpected source. A human child who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, walking through the diplomatic area as if she belonged there. Currently, Earth and the other human worlds are home to representatives of over 400 different species. She said with the casual confidence that seemed to be a human trait. My school has kids from 73 different worlds.
And what do you want to be when you grow up?
Zethkar found himself asking. The child considered the question seriously. I'm going to be a xenobiologist. I want to help make sure that every species in the galaxy has a safe place to live. Before anyone could respond to this statement, the formal negotiations began. What followed was unlike any diplomatic proceeding in galactic history. The human delegation consisted of 3 individuals, an elderly woman who introduced herself as Secretary Chen, a middle-aged man identified as Dr. Patel, and, to everyone's surprise, General Morrison himself. Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Chen began, thank you for coming to Earth. We understand that humanity's recent actions have caused concern throughout the galaxy, and we hope to address those concerns today. Admiral Korthan leaned forward, his diplomatic training taking over. Secretary Chen, the Coalition appreciates Earth's willingness to discuss these matters. However, we must address the elephant in the room. Humanity has demonstrated weapons capabilities that pose a potential threat to every civilization in the galaxy. Admiral, Dr. Patel replied, you're absolutely correct. We do possess weapons that could threaten any civilization in the galaxy. The question we hope to answer today is simple. Why would we want to? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zethkar watched as the Coalition delegation struggled to formulate a response to something they hadn't expected. History suggests, Korthan said carefully, that species with overwhelming military superiority often use that superiority to impose their will on others. Secretary Chen smiled, and Zethkar was beginning to understand that human smiles could be more unsettling than their weapons.
Admiral, let me ask you a question in return. What does humanity want? What do you mean? I mean, what are humanity's goals?
What do we want from the galaxy? Korthan looked confused. I assume expansion? Resources? Territory? Admiral, Morrison spoke up, Earth already has more resources than we can use. We've learned to convert matter at the quantum level, remember? We can make anything we need from raw materials, and space is full of raw materials. Then, strategic advantage? Military dominance? Doctor. Patel shook his head. We already have military dominance. We've demonstrated that we can destroy any threat to our security. What would be the point of conquest? Zethkar found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious about the answer to this question. What did humanity want? Secretary Chen activated the holographic display, which showed images from throughout the galaxy, worlds where different species lived and thrived, space stations where multiple civilizations worked together, and scenes of peace and prosperity that represented the best of galactic civilization. Admiral Korthan, humanity wants exactly what we've started to build. We want a galaxy where every species can live without fear of extinction. We want children from 400 different worlds to go to school together and dream about making the universe better. We want to ensure that no civilization ever again faces the choice between extinction and surrender. And you believe that military supremacy is the path to this goal? General Morrison answered this time, his scarred face serious. Admiral, we've tried every other path. Diplomacy fails when one side has overwhelming force and no moral restraint. Economic pressure doesn't work against species that consume entire worlds. The only language the Void Hunters understand is superior firepower. But the Void Hunters are defeated. The Void Hunters we fought here were defeated, Morrison corrected. According to the intelligence we extracted from their scouts, there are thousands of Void Hunter colonies throughout the galaxy. We've eliminated one fleet. The war is just beginning. Patel activated another section of the display showing star charts that extended far beyond known space. Thousands of systems were highlighted in red, each one representing a Void Hunter presence. The Coalition has been fighting a defensive war for 3,000 years, he said. You've been trying to contain the threat, manage it, find some way to coexist with it. How has that worked? The question was rhetorical, but Admiral Korthan answered anyway. We've maintained stability, protected our core worlds, and lost how many colonies? How many entire species have gone extinct while you maintain stability?